The house was quiet that evening, but not the kind of quiet that soothes you. It was the heavy, suffocating silence that follows an argument, the kind that makes even the tick of a clock sound like thunder. I sat at the edge of the worn-out sofa, staring at the floor, my hands trembling as I replayed her words in my head. My daughter, my only child, the one I had raised with every ounce of strength and sacrifice I could muster, had just looked me straight in the eyes and said, "You're just a burden here." It wasn't the first time we'd argued, of course. Over the years, there had been disagreements, moments of tension like every family has. But this was different. This wasn't the frustration of a daughter snapping at her mother in the heat of the moment. This was sharper, colder. It cut deeper than anything I'd ever heard from her lips. For a moment, I couldn't even breathe. The woman I had carried inside me, nursed, protected, fought for. She had reduced me to nothing more than dead weight in her home. My chest tightened, and my eyes burned as if they were begging to let go of tears, but I held them back. Crying wouldn't change anything. I watched her storm into her room and slam the door, her footsteps echoing with irritation, and I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't just pain, it was the stirring of something else. Something darker, something I hadn't felt in years. I thought back to the years I had lived before she ever came into my life. The life I had left behind. The secrets I had buried to become the mother she needed me to be. She had no idea who I truly was, what I had endured, and what I was capable of. All she saw now was a tired, aging woman sitting quietly in the corner of her house, grateful for scraps of kindness. She thought I was weak. She thought I was powerless. She thought I was just a burden. I closed my eyes and memories flooded me. Nights when I worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over our heads. Days when I skipped meals so she could eat. Times when I smiled through exhaustion so she would never know the depth of my struggles. I remembered her first steps, her first words, her laughter as a child. She had once clung to me as though I was her whole world. When did that change? When did her love turn into resentment? The answer, I supposed, didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that she had forgotten. Forgotten who I was. Forgotten what I had done. Forgotten the blood that ran in her veins. I stood slowly, the old bones in my body aching with the weight of years and heartache. I walked to the window and looked out at the quiet street. The glow of street lamps stretching long shadows across the pavement. It reminded me of the nights long ago when I used to wait in shadows myself, for reasons my daughter never knew. Reasons I swore I would never revisit. But life has a cruel way of forcing you back into the very places you swore you'd left behind. As I gazed out into the night, I whispered to myself, "She thinks I'm a burden. She has no idea." The truth was, I had once been someone people feared. Someone who knew how to survive, how to fight, how to take what was mine and protect it at any cost. Those skills never disappeared, they simply went dormant, buried under years of motherhood and sacrifice. But now they stirred inside me again, like an old fire reigniting after years of silence. I heard her bedroom door open behind me. She walked into the kitchen, probably to grab a snack, pretending as though nothing had happened. I listened to her footsteps, the casual shuffle of someone who felt secure in their dominance. I didn't turn around. I just watched the streetlight flicker outside, and in that moment, I made a decision. If she wanted to see me as a burden, I would show her exactly how wrong she was. If she believed I was powerless, I would remind her where she came from. If she thought I had no place in her life anymore, then she was about to learn that you should never underestimate a woman who has nothing left to lose. I clenched my fist slowly, feeling strength flow back into me. The years had taken much from me, but they hadn't taken everything. My daughter thought she knew me, but she only knew the version of me I allowed her to see. The gentle mother, the tired woman, the one who had softened her edges for the sake of love. But the real me, the one who once fought tooth and nail against betrayal, the one who had looked monsters in the eye and lived to tell the tale, she was still here, waiting. And my daughter had just woken her up. I sat back down, forcing calm into my voice as I called out, "Dinner will be ready soon." My tone was smooth, almost gentle, but inside my mind was already weaving a plan. This wasn't just about revenge, it was about a lesson. A reminder. A reckoning she would never forget. She thought I was a burden. But before this was over, she would know exactly who I was. And she would regret every word. That night, sleep refused to come. I lay in the narrow bed that she had so generously offered me when I first moved into her house. The sheets smelled faintly of detergent and her perfume. But the comfort they were supposed to provide had long since vanished. I could hear her in the next room, laughing softly on the phone, her voice light and carefree, as if the words she'd hurled at me hours earlier had never existed. Yeah, I just told her she needs to stop hanging around like some lost shadow. She whispered to whoever was on the other end. She doesn't get it. This isn't her home anymore. I've got my own life. She's just extra. The knife twisted deeper. I turned my face toward the wall, fighting the tears that threatened to fall. Not because I was weak, but because I refused to let even the night see me broken. My daughter's laughter trailed off into the silence, and I realized then that whatever love she once held for me had been eroded, grain by grain, until nothing remained but annoyance. It was almost poetic in a cruel way. I had given her everything, and in return I had become nothing. But people often forget that even the most overlooked shadow has teeth. I closed my eyes, and a memory struck me like lightning. The face of a man, his eyes filled with arrogance as he once told me I was worthless, disposable. That had been many years ago, but I still remembered the way his voice cracked when he realized he had underestimated me. He hadn't lived long enough to regret it properly. My lips curved into the faintest of smiles at the thought. The world had long since forgotten who I was. My daughter never knew. But I hadn't forgotten. I couldn't. By morning, I had made up my mind. When I stepped into the kitchen, she was already there, scrolling on her phone, sipping coffee as if she were queen of the world. She didn't even glance at me when she muttered, "You should really find something to do during the day, Mom. I can't keep babysitting you." The words stung, but I kept my face calm, almost serene. "You're right," I said softly. She blinked, finally looking up at me, surprised by my agreement. I smiled faintly. "Yes, I need to do something. I've been too idle. Maybe I've forgotten who I am?" She frowned, clearly not understanding, but shrugged it off. "Well, good. Maybe you can join some club or whatever old people do." She smirked and returned to her phone, her attention already elsewhere. She had no idea that those words had sparked the beginning of something she could never imagine. Later that day, I went out for a walk. Not the slow, meandering kind of walk most elderly women take. No, this was purposeful. My steps carried me to places I hadn't seen in decades. Back alleys where the paint peeled from brick walls, streets where old acquaintances once whispered secrets under the hum of flickering lamps. Most of them were gone now, dead, imprisoned, or swallowed by the same streets they once ruled. But there were always a few who lingered, ghosts of a forgotten world, and I knew exactly where to find one. He was sitting outside a run-down cafe, his hair gray, his face lined, but his eyes still sharp as ever. When he saw me, he froze, his cup halfway to his lips. Slowly, a smile stretched across his face. "Well, I'll be damned," he muttered. "If it isn't her." I sat across from him without invitation, my back straight, my hands folded neatly in my lap. "Hello, Victor," I said softly. He chuckled, shaking his head. "I thought you were dead." "Not yet," I replied. "But I need a favor." Victor leaned back, studying me. "All these years, and you come back out of the blue asking for favors. You haven't changed." "I have," I admitted. "But not enough to forget." He narrowed his eyes, searching my face for clues. "What do you want?" I paused for a moment, savoring the weight of the moment. "I need resources, a reminder of who I used to be." His laughter was low, almost disbelieving. "After all this time, you want back in?" "No," I said firmly. "This isn't about me. It's about a lesson. A very personal one." Victor studied me for a long time, then nodded slowly. "I always knew you weren't the type to fade quietly. Tell me what you need." And so I did. When I returned home that evening, my daughter barely glanced up from the television. She didn't notice the fire in my eyes, the purpose in my stride. She thought I had gone for a harmless stroll, maybe to clear my head. But deep inside, the old me was awake again. And soon, she would see. I stood at the kitchen counter preparing dinner as if nothing had changed. My hands moved calmly, but my mind was already weaving the web. She thought she was safe. She thought she had me figured out. But she had no idea what I was about to do. The first step in any lesson, I reminded myself, is patience. A well-timed strike is far more devastating than an impulsive one. So, for days, I played the part of the obedient, fading mother. I kept quiet when she mocked me. I smiled when she dismissed my words. I even let her believe she was winning. Because the truth was, she was already ensnared in a plan she didn't even know existed. But behind closed doors, I was preparing. Victor had delivered more than I asked for. An old phone, untraceable. A small key that opened a forgotten storage unit on the edge of town. And inside that unit lay pieces of my past, items I had sworn I would never touch again. The air inside was stale, filled with the dust of years gone by, but as I pulled back the old tarp, my hands trembled not with fear, but with familiarity. Files, ledgers, cash tucked away in envelopes. Even a few things more dangerous than money or paper. It was like opening a time capsule of the woman I once was. I spent hours in that unit, reacquainting myself with every detail, every weapon in my old arsenal. Not the physical kind, though there were some of those too, but the kind that truly crippled a person's knowledge. Secrets, leverage. And if there was one thing my daughter had forgotten, it was that I always knew how to use information. Back at the house, she continued her careless routine. She hosted friends, laughed in my presence as though I were invisible, made snide comments about my old-fashioned ways. Each word was another match tossed onto a pile of dry wood. She didn't realize how quickly it was catching fire. One evening, she came home with a man. He was well dressed, handsome in a polished way, with a sharpness in his eyes that reminded me all too much of the men I used to know. He glanced at me with mild curiosity before leaning toward her and whispering something that made her laugh. "Mom," she said dismissively, "this is Daniel." "Daniel, this is my mother." She didn't even bother to dress the introduction with pride or affection. Just a burden, just a shadow in the corner. Daniel extended his hand politely, but there was a flicker of calculation in his eyes. I shook his hand, my grip firm, and offered a faint smile. "Nice to meet you, Daniel." Later that night, as I listened to them talk in hushed tones behind her bedroom door, I caught fragments of conversation, words like inheritance, property, liabilities. My stomach clenched, not in fear, but in recognition. I knew men like Daniel, charming, persuasive, always with a hidden ledger in their minds, calculating what could be gained and what could be discarded. And my daughter, my foolish, ungrateful daughter, was falling right into his trap. The irony was bitter. She thought I was the burden, the obstacle in her life. But the true danger was the man she had welcomed into her bed. For a moment, I considered warning her, telling her the truth about men like him, but then I remembered her words, sharp and cold as a blade. "You're just a burden here." No. She didn't want my advice. She didn't want my presence. Then she could reap what she had sown. But that didn't mean I would sit idly by. I began digging. Quietly, carefully, I used the resources Victor had given me. Within a week, I knew more about Daniel than my daughter would learn in a year. His failed business ventures, his debts, the women he had left behind, each one drained of money, dignity, and trust. He was a predator and she was his next prey. And so, my plan shifted. This wasn't just about reminding her who I was. This was about saving her from herself, whether she deserved it or not. And I would do it in a way that would etch the lesson deep into her bones. She would learn that dismissing me came at a price. One evening, as they sat in the living room, sipping wine and laughing, I stepped into the doorway. My voice was calm, almost casual. "Daniel," I said softly. "How's Rebecca these days?" The glass froze halfway to his lips. My daughter frowned. "Who's Rebecca?" Daniel recovered quickly, forcing a smile. "I don't know what she's talking about." But I could see the panic flicker in his eyes. And so could she. I smiled faintly. "Strange. Because Rebecca still has the engagement ring you gave her. Along with a child who looks a little too much like you." My daughter's eyes widened. She turned toward him, her voice sharp. "Is that true?" He stammered, searching for words, but I didn't give him the chance. I stepped forward, my gaze never leaving his. I could go on, but I think that's enough for tonight. The silence that followed was heavy charged. My daughter looked between us, her face pale, her hands trembling. And in that moment, I saw the first crack in her certainty. The first hint of realization that she had underestimated me. But this was only the beginning. Daniel left that night in a storm of excuses and promises, but his mask had already slipped. My daughter didn't sleep. I could hear her pacing the hallway, whispering on the phone, her voice sharp with anger and confusion. For the first time in months, she looked at me differently. Not with disdain, but with suspicion. The next morning, she cornered me in the kitchen, her eyes red from lack of sleep. "How do you know about him?" she demanded. "What are you doing, snooping around my life?" I sipped my tea slowly, letting the silence stretch, just long enough to make her squirm. Then I said, "I know men like him. I've seen them before. And I've seen what they do to women who think they're in control." Her jaw tightened. "You had no right." "I had every right." I cut in, my voice sharper than she expected. You may think I'm just a burden, but I see things you don't, things you refuse to see. That man would have ruined you. She flinched, but instead of gratitude, her eyes filled with rage. Stop acting like you know everything about me. You don't? This is my life, not yours. Just stay out of it. And just like that, she turned her back on me again. But she was rattled now. The seed of doubt had been planted, and doubt has a way of growing into something much bigger. I let her believe I had stepped back. I resumed my quiet role, making dinners, tidying up, staying in the background. But all the while, I kept digging into Daniel's world. And what I found was even darker than I had imagined. He wasn't just a conman chasing women for money. He was connected to debts, to dangerous people, the kind who didn't forgive and certainly didn't forget. His charm was a mask that hid a man drowning in promises he couldn't keep. And my daughter, with her stubborn pride, was clinging to him like he was salvation. One evening, I returned to the storage unit. Under the dim light bulb, I spread out the evidence I had gathered. Photographs, documents, names scrawled on scraps of paper. I traced the lines between them like a spider weaving its web. The picture was clear. Daniel wasn't just trouble. He was a storm waiting to destroy anyone close to him. And my daughter was standing right in the eye of it. That night, I found her sitting on the sofa, scrolling through messages with a tense expression. She looked up at me, her voice tired. He says it's not true. That you're making things up because you don't like him. Do you know how crazy you sound? I sat across from her, my gaze steady. And do you believe him? She hesitated, just for a second, and in that hesitation, I saw the crack widening. Mom, she sighed, pressing her hands to her temples. You don't understand, I need him. He's the first man who's really cared about me. You don't know what that feels like. My heart twisted, not in anger, but in sorrow. She was so desperate for love, for validation, that she couldn't see the noose tightening around her neck. And that desperation, it was my fault too. Maybe if I had loved her better, stronger, she wouldn't have been searching for it in men like him. But guilt would not save her now. Action would. The next week, Daniel's mask began to slip in front of her. Small lies unraveled. Promises went unkept. Money began to disappear from her accounts. And still, she clung to him, even as the walls around her started to shake. Until one night, the knock came at the door. It was past midnight. Heavy, insistent. My daughter, half asleep, stumbled to answer it. But when she opened the door, the color drained from her face. Two men stood there, broad-shouldered, their expressions cold as stone. Where's Daniel? One of them asked, his voice like gravel. My daughter stammered, Ha! He's not here. Who are you? They exchanged a glance, then shoved past her into the house. I stepped into the hallway, my eyes locking onto theirs. I knew their kind. I had faced their kind before. Who's this? The taller one asked, eyeing me with disdain. His mother-in-law, I said calmly, folding my arms. Where's Daniel? The other demanded. I answered. But I know where you'll find him. My daughter's eyes widened in shock, but I didn't flinch. I gave them an address. One I knew Daniel frequented when he was trying to hide. They didn't question me. They left as quickly as they came, their footsteps heavy on the porch. The door slammed shut. My daughter spun on me, her face pale with fury and fear. What the hell was that? Why do you know this stuff? I looked at her, my voice low and steady. Because I've lived in a world you can't even imagine. A world you're too naive to survive. And if you keep chasing after men like him, it'll swallow you whole. She stared at me, speechless, trembling. For the first time, she looked at me not as a burden, but as something she couldn't define. And that was exactly what I wanted. Because now, the lesson had truly begun. The house felt different after that night. My daughter barely spoke to me, but her silence wasn't born of indifference anymore. It was fear, confusion, and the gnawing realization that I wasn't who she thought I was. She would catch me in the kitchen, her eyes narrowing as if searching for cracks in the mask I wore. Sometimes, I'd find her watching me, like she was seeing me for the first time. But still, her pride wouldn't let her yield. 2 days later, Daniel came crawling back. He slipped in through the back door, sweat on his brow, his smile forced. Baby, it's all a misunderstanding, he murmured, cupping her face in his hands. Those guys don't mean anything. I'll fix it, I promise. I stood in the corner, arms folded. He didn't even look at me. To him, I was still just an obstacle, a frail old woman who talked too much. But I could see it in my daughter's eyes. Her walls were crumbling. Doubt was eating away at her, but she was still too afraid to let go. Later that evening, after he left with more of her money in his pocket, I sat with her at the table. She wouldn't meet my gaze. "You're still defending him," I said softly. Her shoulders stiffened. I just need him, Mom. I don't have anyone else." The words sliced through me. She didn't realize what she was admitting, that in her desperate hunger for love, she had forgotten the love I'd already given her. All the sacrifices, all the nights I went hungry so she could eat, the years I broke my body to provide for her. And still, I was just a burden in her eyes. But now, she was about to see the truth. The next morning, I called Victor. My voice was calm, steady, though my heart beat like a drum. "It's time," I said simply. That night, I took my daughter with me. She didn't know where we were going, but I told her, "If you want to see who Daniel really is, follow me. If not, stay home and keep believing his lies." Her pride wouldn't let her back down. She came. I led her through the darker parts of the city, where neon lights flickered and shadows stretched long. Finally, we arrived at a bar tucked away on a side street, a place where men like Daniel showed their true faces. Inside, the air was thick with smoke and tension. At a corner table, surrounded by empty glasses and bitter laughter, sat Daniel. He wasn't alone. My daughter froze when she saw him draped over another woman, his arm around her waist, his lips whispering poison into her ear. The sight drained the last of the color from her face. She moved forward, anger and heartbreak twisting together, but I caught her wrist. "Wet?" I whispered. "Watch." We stood in the shadows as Daniel's charm unraveled. He boasted about the money he had squeezed from his navvy girlfriend, how much more he could take before disappearing. He laughed at her expense, at the foolishness of the woman who believed in him. I felt my daughter tremble beside me, her body stiff with fury and humiliation. Tears streamed silently down her cheeks, but her eyes burned with something darker. For the first time, she wasn't just hurt. She was beginning to understand. When Daniel finally left the bar, swaggering into the night, I guided her outside. She followed silently, her face pale and hollow. We found him in the alley, fumbling with his phone, too drunk to notice us at first. When he finally looked up, his eyes widened. "What the hell are you two doing here?" he spat. My daughter stepped forward, her voice breaking. "You used me. You lied to me?" he sneered. "So what? You think you're special? You're just another." Before he could finish, I cut him off. My voice was low, steady, like a blade pressed to his throat. "Careful what you say next, Daniel." He laughed, trying to shake off the chill that crept into his spine. "Or what? You'll hit me with your cane." I stepped closer, my eyes never leaving his. "You have no idea who you're dealing with." For a moment, he faltered. He tried to mask it with bravado, but the flicker of unease betrayed him. He saw something in my gaze, something sharp, dangerous, something that belonged to a woman who had survived far worse men than him. I leaned in, close enough for only him to hear. "I know who you owe. I know how much. And if you ever come near my daughter again, I will make sure they find you before you have the chance to run. Do you understand me?" His face drained of color. He opened his mouth to argue, but the words died on his tongue. He nodded once, stiffly, before stumbling backward and vanishing into the night. My daughter stood frozen, staring at me as if she were seeing a ghost. "Mom, what was that? Who were you?" I looked at her, my voice soft but firm. "I'm the woman you called a burden, and I'm the reason you're still standing here." She didn't answer. She couldn't. The truth was too heavy, too raw. That night, she didn't sleep in her room. She sat in the living room, silent, her eyes fixed on nothing. I watched her from the shadows, knowing the battle inside her had only just begun. And for the first time in years, I felt no sorrow, no guilt, only resolve, because the lesson wasn't over. Not yet. Morning crept into the house like an intruder, pale light spilling through the curtains. My daughter hadn't moved from the sofa all night. Her face was hollow, her eyes swollen from crying, but there was something else in them too, a flicker of fear, not of Daniel, of me. When I walked into the room, she straightened, her voice hoarse. "You knew everything about him? About those men? About that world? How do you know all that?" I sat in the armchair across from her, folding my hands in my lap. For a long time I didn't answer. She needed to feel the weight of the silence, to understand that the woman she thought she knew was only one layer of who I really was. "Finally," I said, "because once I lived in it." Her lips parted, but no words came out. I looked out the window, my mind drifting back. "Before you were born, before I became your mother, I wasn't the quiet woman you see now. I was different. I did things you can't imagine. Things I'm not proud of, but things that kept me alive. She shook her head, disbelieving. You can barely walk up the stairs without holding the rail. You're not. I wasn't always like this. I interrupted sharply. Once, people feared me. Once, people respected me. But when I had you, I gave it all up. I buried that life so you would never have to know it. I thought I could protect you by keeping you blind. Her eyes shimmered with a storm of emotions. Anger, confusion, a shred of awe she couldn't admit. And you just what? Kept it a secret all these years. Yes! I said simply. Because I wanted you to grow up free of it. To believe the world was kinder than it really is. She leaned back, her voice bitter. Well, it wasn't. You think I had some perfect life. You were always working, always tired, always gone. I raised myself half the time. Her words cut deep, but I didn't flinch. I let her anger spill out because anger was better than denial. And still, I said quietly, you had food on the table, clothes on your back, a roof over your head. Do you think that came from nowhere? Her breath caught. She turned her face away, ashamed of her own cruelty. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating. Finally, she whispered, why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you let me see who you really are? I studied her carefully. Because I wanted you to love me for the mother I was, not fear me for the woman I had been. Her shoulders slumped. For the first time, I saw not defiance in her, but a small, broken child. The little girl who used to run to me after nightmares, who once believed I could chase away monsters. She realized now that the monsters hadn't disappeared. I had simply learned to live among them. But the world doesn't let secrets rest forever. That afternoon, the knock at the door came again. Not Daniel, not the collectors, but Victor. He stepped inside with a grim look, his voice low. They're looking for him, and they know he was here. My daughter stiffened. What does that mean? It means, I said quietly, that danger has already brushed against our door. And if they think Daniel's problems are tied to this house, they won't hesitate to come back. Her face paled. Oh my God, Victor met my eyes. You know what has to be done? I nodded. I had hoped to shield her a little longer, to let her absorb the truth in pieces. But life was giving us no time. That evening, I prepared her. I taught her how to watch the streetlights, how to notice when footsteps trailed too long behind. I showed her how to hold her keys between her fingers as a weapon, how to move silently across creaking floors. She resisted at first, her pride flaring, but fear stripped her of arrogance. By midnight, she was listening, absorbing, realizing that the woman she had mocked as a burden was the only reason she would survive what was coming. At one point, she whispered, I don't even know who you are anymore. I looked her in the eye, steady and unflinching. I am your mother. That has never changed. But now, you're going to see the rest of me. For the first time in months, there was no bitterness in her gaze. Only a fragile thread of trust, thin as glass but there. And I knew then that the lesson was working. She was beginning to understand. But lessons are never complete without a final test. And the test was already on its way, faster than either of us realized. Because Daniel hadn't disappeared into the night. He had run straight to the men who hunted him. And to save his own skin, he had given them the one thing he thought would buy him time: our names. Our address. He had delivered us right into the wolves' mouths. The storm arrived 3 nights later. It was late, the house cloaked in shadows, when I felt it. That heavy silence. The kind that presses against your skin before something breaks. I stood at the window, staring at the empty street. But my gut told me we weren't alone. Then came the sound. Tires crunching against gravel. 2 cars pulling up outside. The faint metallic click of doors shutting. Boots on the pavement. My daughter was on the sofa, dozing. I touched her shoulder, whispering, get up. Now. She blinked groggily, then froze when she saw my face. She didn't argue. She followed me, silent, heart pounding, as I led her into the kitchen. The knock came, hard enough to rattle the frame. A voice growled, open up. I motioned for her to stay quiet, then walked to the door. I didn't open it, but I spoke through it, calm and steady. He's not here. Lauder on the other side. Cruel. Confident. We know. But he told us everything. You helped him. That makes you ours too. My daughter's hand clamped around my arm, trembling. I gently pried her fingers loose, pressing her hand flat against her chest. Breathe, I whispered. Do not panic. Then I opened the door. 3 men stood there, shadows carved in flesh. Their eyes were cold, their hands heavy in their pockets where I knew weapons waited. The leader stepped forward. Where is he? I met his gaze, unflinching. Gone. And you won't find him here? He smirked. Then maybe we take something else. A little collateral. His eyes slid past me to my daughter. She stiffened, panic flashing in her eyes. That was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment she would finally see me, not as a burden, but as the shield I had always been. I stepped between them, my voice ablade. Touch her, and you'll never leave this house alive. For a heartbeat, silence. Then the men laughed, cruel and sharp. But when the leader leaned closer, his smirk faltered. He saw it, the look in my eyes. The one Daniel had seen in the alley. The one that didn't belong to a frail mother, but to a woman forged in fire, tempered in survival. You don't know who you're messing with, he muttered. No, I said softly, leaning closer. You don't? The tension stretched tight, seconds dragging like hours. Then, as if the air itself cracked, Victor's car pulled up across the street. He stepped out, calm as ever, his presence unmistakable. Backup, insurance. The men saw him, weighed their odds, and realized this wasn't the easy job they'd expected. The leader clicked his tongue, frustrated. This isn't over. He signaled his men, and just like that, they retreated into the night, swallowed by their cars. The door closed. Silence. My daughter collapsed against the wall, shaking, tears streaming down her face. Mom, oh my God, I thought. I took her hand, steadying her. You thought I was weak. You thought I was a burden. But now you know the truth. I have always been fighting for you, even when you didn't see it. As she sobbed, clinging to me like she hadn't since she was a child. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I stroked her hair, my own chest heavy with emotions I hadn't let surface in years. No, you do. And you'll never forget. The rest of the night passed in silence, the house wrapped in uneasy peace. But something fundamental had shifted. The next morning, as sunlight poured through the windows, my daughter set 2 cups of coffee on the table. She slid one toward me, her hands still trembling, but her voice steady. I don't want to run from you anymore. I want to understand. I want to know who you really are. I studied her face, the fragility and the strength woven together. Finally, I nodded. Then you're ready. Ready to see the world for what it is, and ready to see me for who I am. She reached across the table, taking my hand. You're not a burden, Mom. You never were. You're the only reason I'm still here. Her words sank into me, deeper than any wound, healing places I didn't realize still bled. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not the polite, wary smile I had worn for so long, but a real one. Raw and unguarded. The fire inside me didn't dim that day. It never would. But for the first time, it wasn't burning alone. My daughter finally understood, and that was enough. Because revenge, in the end, wasn't about hurting her. It was about opening her eyes. And now, when she looked at me, she no longer saw a burden. She saw her mother. And she would never forget what I was about to do. Because I had already done it. I had brought her back to me. The war was over. And this time, we had both survived.